Okay, so welcome. Tonight's session, I proposed to Adam Kogan that we needed to do a session on Power BI Embedded. My background is that I was a developer many years ago. I remember when .NET was released, and I was working on ASP.NET projects in the day, but I'm really a business intelligence specialist, so I focus more on the data side, supporting analytics, so I'm more a data warehouse, cube reporting sort of person. But what I love about this topic is the worlds collide. You know, the developer and analytics come together, and that's the story that I'd like to share with you tonight. So very brief background about who I am. So Peter Myers as a data platform MVP for now over 10 years. Focus on business analytics, BI, but with a development background. And I come all the way from Melbourne. So what I'd like to do, just to engage you a little, is to introduce you to Power BI through a survey. So let me just demo first of all. I have a very simple survey here written in a web app, and it's going to ask what my gender is, what my age group would be, my postal code in Sydney, so I'm staying in a hotel downtown. I'm a BI developer. I've been to a couple of these user groups before, and the best coffee, I think, comes from Melbourne. Now, when I click submit, we will see that that response shows up here, real time in a Power BI dashboard. It's actually not the topic of tonight, but it does relate to what needs to be described tonight. So I'm going to invite you, optional only. You have a QR code here, you have a tiny URL. Could you just spend the next 30 seconds as honestly as you can, bringing up that web page, submit answers to those 6 questions. We'll tie this back into the topic later on in the presentation. So I'll give you 30 seconds to submit some details about yourself. Yes, I'm a terrible web developer, or a terrible web designer by the look of that on a phone. All right, woohoo, we have somebody has submitted. The mechanics, how this is working in the background is that upon submitting your survey results, an event is sent to an Azure Service Bus Event Hub. There is a stream analytics job listening and passing through every survey result to a data set in Power BI. This gives me a little background about who you are as far as an audience. So I see a couple of BI developers, one of which is me, software developer, database developer, business analyst, and then we have a couple of software developers. That is really the target for this topic. All right. Any questions so far about this? Who has not worked with Power BI before? So half of you in this group. For those that have, I would probably guess that you've worked with the Power BI service. You've signed in, signed up for Power BI, and then you're working with data sets, reports, and dashboards. Is that fair to say for the people that have? Has anybody worked with Power BI Embedded before? All right. What's driving that dashboard, by the way, is a report. It's not beautiful, but it's visualizing the data that you've just submitted. The topic of tonight is how do we move beyond the Power BI service, which is a tenant concept that within an org you sign in, you work with data assets, reports, dashboards, and you have great techniques to share these within the organization. The story is, how can we take the goodness of these interactive reports and embed them into our own applications? This is distinctly different from the Power BI service that is authenticating via a service in your tenant or your Azure Active Directory. Here is your application in control, authenticating your own users within their own security contexts and leveraging the reports that we have here. All right, so that brings us into focus about what's being discussed tonight. The outline then will be a very brief introduction to Power BI to set the scene, and then I wanted to walk through end to end how I would develop and embed a report. That requires taking a look at the Power BI desktop. So is there anybody here that has already worked with Power BI desktop? Okay, so a handful of you, but not everybody. And what we're discovering is in a developer audience, never heard of the tool, how much does it cost, where do I get it? Let's go through the whole story. But also there are specific design approaches that we must adhere to when working with Power BI Embedded. So I'll convey them during that part of the demonstration. Then we get to the topic of provisioning an Azure resource for Power BI Embedded. And programmatically, I'll create a workspace, I will import a Power BI desktop report, I'll apply new connection details for the gateway to connect to my database, and then we'll take a look at how we can embed that into our own web applications. I would like to then come back and introduce a scenario whereby what if users shouldn't see all data? What if we need to contain that American users see American sales data and Australian users would see Australian data? So we'll come back, update the Power BI desktop report with security definitions, republish, and see how we can apply that to the demo. Any questions before I make a start? So I really do welcome interactivity with the audience. So at any stage, if there's a question that you need to have answered, please raise it, and I'll do my best at the time. To set the scene, pretty much Power BI is a new evolution of BI in that it moves beyond the traditional BI, which has been corporate enterprise delivered. These have been really large projects with months delivery with milestones. And they're still very important to the business today. Enterprise data warehousing is the topic there. But BI evolved some years back to also extend to the business itself. The problem with enterprise BI wasn't terribly agile. And so, Microsoft specifically, when they built a new generation of tools that we call the second wave of BI, self-service BI, does anyone know what Microsoft delivered to enable BI in the business? So not just a consumption experience, we already have that, but I need to produce my own solutions. Is actually built in as part of Office. So we saw a series of add-ins come out. Specifically, Power Pivot came out with SQL Server 2008 R2, providing very rich modeling in Excel on your desktop. And then that was extended with Power View for interactive reporting, and then Power Query. And so that family exists to this day, and it's baked into Office. But where recently Microsoft have moved is into a third wave, which is about delivering BI direct to end users. There's nothing wrong with the self-service BI, but it does require significant skills to be able to produce a solution. And so there are business users that want immediate access to data and to start being productive based on it. And so in response to this new wave, Microsoft have recently released a cloud-based business intelligence service. It is branded Power BI, so the shirt that I'm wearing here, the colors and the logo. And just to make it really brief, is that it's designed to connect to any type of data. That could be any type of format. It could be streaming data. It could be file source data, and it could be on-prem, or it could be hybrid, or it could be software as a service data. So it's sort of the final frontier. You can sort of connect to anything from this service within reason. And then the service itself is responsible for storing or describing data sets, allowing you to build interactive reports on them, and then dashboards, as you just experienced, all presented here through an individual's workspace. And then the story extends beyond this to, let's allow Q&A. So where is the best coffee? As a pie. Best coffee, submissions. So the ability to sort of ask a natural language question and have a response come back as a visual. And because that response is interesting and I'd like to refer to it, let me pin it back to the dashboard so I've got that easily available for future reference. Okay, there's the dashboarding side of what this service is designed to achieve. And there's all sorts of stories about how we're going to keep data current with gateways and refreshing and so on. In essence, that's what the Power BI service offers to us today. A key part of the service is the ability to use a tool called Power BI Desktop as a freely downloadable application in both 32 and 64-bit. It supports the ability to connect to data, to explore it visually, to build reports on it, to secure it, and then to share it. And the main story is that you would take a Power BI desktop file and you would publish it to the service, whereupon it would become a data set and a report. And then you could build dashboards on it, and then you could start to share it. And then if necessary, you could set up refresh capabilities to keep the data current in the service. There is also a REST API, so a great topic for developers, but out of scope for this evening. So the ability to deliver real-time dashboards, as I've just demonstrated, to integrate reports and dashboards into your own apps, which is a very different story to tonight, and I'll clarify at the end of the session. And there's also the ability to work with custom visuals. So when you take a look at the broad array of visuals that are available to a report author, you can build your own, and that's an entire topic. You delivered a framework, and when you can work within the framework to build whatever data visualizations you need. All right, so that is my intro that provides a very brief understanding of what that service is today. Now, in addition to that service, and what we focus on in this session, is that Power BI Embedded is a core component that is delivered with Azure as an analytics service. All right, so we have this ability to create reports in Power BI Desktop, deploy them not to a personal workspace, as you'll see here on my left. I've signed in as a corporate account. These are my assets in a workspace, but Azure can also define these workspaces, whereupon you can publish reports and then embed them into applications. This is the Azure service that we described tonight. You have a question?
So you got this desktop Power BI, which is reasonably good, and we've dabbled with it, and you can connect it live to SQL Server databases and stuff like that. They're obviously not making any money out of that side of it. So one of the questions I'll leave floating out there is, how do they make their money?
So the question that's come up for the benefit of the recording is that you're working with Power BI Desktop, you're using the direct connect capability that I'm about to demonstrate for others here tonight. This allows the Power BI Desktop file not to store data, but to describe in terms of metadata how it can query the underlying database, in this case SQL Server. How do Microsoft make money? So it's really designed that that file would be published to the service. If you publish a Power BI Desktop file using direct connect capabilities, only the Pro license can use it. So that's $10 per user per month. So you can publish these as much as you like, but you must have a Pro license. And for those that you share to, they must also have a Pro license.
So anyone looking at the content you're building?
Oh, they can't even look at it. All right, you can publish a data set that's using Direct Connect.
You can hand out the desktop version for free and they can connect to
Absolutely, nothing to stop you telling everybody to download Power BI Desktop. And but the problem with this is they're going to be challenged for credentials every time they open that file. Now, you prepared to give them full read-only permission on that data source? Maybe. And in that case, congratulations, you found a free way to work and interact with your data using Power BI Desktop. I don't think Microsoft have a problem with that. They see that most customers that are going to work with that feature are going to publish to the service, and therefore would need that license. Any other questions? Good one. All right, so let's move into the topic, because in order to embed a report, you need a report. And the development tool that you have, as I've just introduced, is Power BI Desktop. So let me go ahead and just launch it. Very, very simple to download and install. Now, when working with Power BI Embedded, there are some restrictions, so to speak. So it doesn't support today the ability to report off on-premises data. So it will require either that your data resides in an Azure SQL database or an Azure SQL data warehouse. There is no word on this, but it would not surprise me that that'll expand in the future, because the Power BI service will support Direct Connect to Oracle, Teradata, SAP HANA, and others, analysis services also. So I'm not here to tell you that that's where it would go. I'm here to say today, with this service, you must connect to one of these two. You should use direct query mode. There's nothing to stop you importing data into the Power BI Desktop file, publishing it to Azure, but then you have to give consideration to how you're going to keep that data current. It's not designed to work that you would continue to push updated files to the service. So, direct query is the mode you would use to connect to one of these two sources. There's an entire story about how visualizations can be customized, as I've described, and Power BI Embedded will work with any custom visuals, including the out-of-the-box visuals. All right. The best way to talk about it is to give you a high-level understanding of what can be achieved with Power BI Desktop, and then to show you end-to-end in demonstration. So here as a developer, what you're going to do is open up Power BI Desktop, connect to one of the 2 supported data sources, and build out queries. So commonly, a query is just logic to connect to a table, perform transformations, and that could be as simple as filtering, renaming columns, or adding new columns based on logic that you have. Once you've defined these queries, and there's typically multiple of them, you then need to ensure that you have appropriate relationships defined between them. Now, ordinarily in Power BI Desktop, you could bring in data from the cloud, on-prem, local files, and you could relate it all together. But that only works in an import scenario, not in a direct query scenario. So you're restricted to one of these sources, you'll create one or more queries, ensure that appropriate relationships are configured, and at this stage you have the basis of a model. Then you take the model and you prepare it. And that could be, let's make it friendly. Let's rename columns so users understand, what this column means, rather than the database developer using strange and concise, terms. The next thing is we'll hide columns that people shouldn't use. We can enrich the model with calculation logic and other properties that we'll explore. Now at this stage, the model's complete and it's ready to start visualizing with a report. And a report is actually a collection of report pages. And that allows you on a single page to lay out visuals, including interactive slices, and whatever it takes to convey meaning from your data. So multiple pages, multiple visuals, and there's some advanced filtering concepts that we won't go into tonight, but it supports a lot of interactivity, whether it's filtering, sorting, drill down, highlighting. Let me demonstrate shortly. We'll return later this evening to talk about, well, what happens when our users of the app shouldn't see all data, and we want to control that they have visibility, and then we can create roles to do that. We then prepare for publication. That's just cleaning things up, and then we take that and we upload it to Azure's Power BI embedded workspace. Let's see this in demo. So I've just launched Power BI Desktop. I'm going to close the splash screen, and then I'm going to bring in data. The common sources are listed already, but when I click More, it really does consist of dozens and dozens of supported sources. So without getting too excited at this stage, you understand that there are only 2 that we're concerned with when working with Azure Power BI Embedded, and they would be the first 2 here. So under the Azure group, I select Azure SQL Database, I connect, and then I fill in details of my server. Power BI dev peter.database.windows.net, and I have a database named Tailspin Toys US. This is the important part. Am I loading data in from this source? The default says you probably are, and no. The requirement will be a direct query and direct connection to that database. We'll need to authenticate. So our best practice here is that you're going to create a read-only user, or a user that has permission just to read the data that's required for reporting. All right, once it's authenticated, it presents to us a navigator and says, well, according to your permission sets, you can retrieve data from these tables. And so what I might do is just select the product table. Power BI Desktop says, well, here's a preview of the data. And from there, I could load this data as is, or I could edit the data. What I will do in this demo is bring in these 4 related tables. So at the Tailspin Toys company, it's a fictitious group, they sell model airplanes and helicopters. They sell them to customers within the states of the United States. So what I'm bringing in is the product catalog, the region which is a classification of states, like Northwest, Northeast, New England, and so on. The states are defined in this table here, and the sales activity is stored in this table. And then I'll click Edit. And what I'm asking Power BI Desktop to do then is to create a query based on each of those 4 source tables. Let's begin with product. No, let's begin with the core, with sales. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The first 5 columns come from the source table. It's very simplistic data for demonstration reasons. The product column, you'll notice it has links called value. That's actually telling us that there are foreign keys on the table. So this could be a very easy way to introduce columns from a related table. I know today that I do not want that. In fact, I know as a data warehousing designer, I like star schema methodologies. And you're probably not aware of what star schema means, but essentially, we want tables that are intuitive to understand. Dimensions being the business entities, products, states, regions, and fact tables that describe the activities or the transactions of the business. It's best not to consolidate them into one table. It's best to keep them as separate tables and define relationships, because users will find it easier to navigate and work with that structure. The next thing that I do is I say, okay, well, I could make this a little more friendly. Unit price, as you see here, isn't spelt with an embedded space, and most database developers would shudder at this thought. While we can put embedded spaces in table names and column names, we generally don't. It's just a convention. But here we're creating a user-friendly experience. And as we lay out reports, if we want the automatic titles to be friendly, well, the names in the model will need to be friendly also. I then notice that I have an ordered date column. Now, in fact, if you pay close attention to the icons up here, they tell us the data type. This is, in fact, a date type, but I've decided that I would like to introduce a column that will just give me the year. So I can, in the query, create a column named year, and rather than type out the logic, I have some snippets. Here is the logic that will produce a text value of CY and the year value of whatever order date is. And so as part of the query definition, I can add in new logic. Now, we need to be careful here in direct query. Well, there's a very rich language. And does anyone know what the language is that is being used here? What is the language used here? DAX. DAX? No. No, we're in the query editor. So the query editor is using I was going to say Power Query formula language. That's sort of its official name. And informally, it's known as M. All right, so that is the language that is being used here. Here's the deal. In direct query mode, the full language is not supported because it must be able to translate what it does directly to the provider, in this case, SQL Server. And so if there is no T-SQL equivalent, you'll start to get errors. So you are limited to reasonably simplistic transformations when working in direct query mode. I'm going to add a second column that will describe month. And so you'll see here that I've now got month in terms of just the year hyphen the month number. And then I'll go ahead and remove the order date. And I've arrived at the complete transformation that I'd like to take place for sales. And let me just point out to you that what this query editor does is allows you to accumulate transformational logic. It's great too because you can always step back and review what did the data look like. And then you ultimately arrive at what you need. Next, I'll move to the product table. So again, we see that there are related columns like sales. I don't need it in this design. Also, photograph is a binary column storing a PNG image. It doesn't make sense for us to query that. And I know that I don't need real retail price, so let me remove unnecessary columns. And then I'll rename columns to make things simpler. Like this could be just SKU or stock keeping unit. This could just be product, and so on. It's important that you name things and rename things early on so that it doesn't break things later down the chain. Let's go for kit type. And then we have channels and demographic. Looks good. We then have states. They're defined in terms of a state code and the state itself. And then I'll hide these.
Stoat code.
Stoat code, that works as well. But thanks for the pickup. How's that? I have really, it's very small on my monitor here, so you've got a TV in front of you. And now I don't have an embedded space, and I think we're finally there. Is that it?
Yeah, sure.
All right, and then lastly, region. So I'll go ahead and remove these columns, and we'll just call this region. All right, 4 queries defined off a single Azure SQL database. So I have a question.
Just a quick question. On the adding of the column with the year, so as James was saying before, we dabbled a little bit with it, right? And in the desktop version that we play with, you create bins where you can create like a bin for your data and group it by year at a later stage. Can you just explain the benefit of adding the column here compared to doing bin? Or is there any difference at all?
So binning is a statistical approach for customizing the way that you'd like to group. All right, so that's not really appropriate when you know that time is predefined. Let me continue with the demo, because either leave order date as a date type, and that will generate an automatic hierarchy, and providing that you work with calendar years, the end of your year period is 31st of December, that will work reasonably well. If not, you'll have to customize the way that you assign months to quarters to years, in which case you would need to follow this approach. All right, so if the end of financial year is 30th of June, you're probably forced into this. But also, if I want labels like CY 2015, I want to customize that, there's the explanation that I'll give you as to why I've done this. All right, because in Tailspin Toys, they have financial years and calendar years, and so we want to make it very clear by the labels as to what time period or type of time they're talking about. All right, 4 queries sourced off one database, and then I come in and I say, let's close and apply the query editor. What that then takes is that those queries are then loaded into the model. Now, because it's direct query, it's not actually loading any data, but it has actually loaded metadata that shows us that we have a model that is described in terms of these 4, and now we call them tables, not queries. From a modeling perspective, queries that are loaded or applied are tables. And we'll notice also that there's a couple of relationships in place and one that's not. Okay, so some auto detection took place, that if there were columns of equal name and same data type, I guess that it sort of says, I think there's relationships between them. All right, so what do we notice here? We've got product, and we have sales, we have state, and region, I think, belongs to state. Oh, well, there's the problem. I removed the region ID, so there's no way to relate state to region. And that's easily fixed because I just come back to the query editor, and I was a little too ambitious with state that when I was removing columns, and then I removed the region ID by mistake. So if I return to this step, I can just say view formula bar, and I could just manually edit it. You'll see that everything you've done through either commands on the ribbon or context menus are just producing some Power Query expression. And now you'll see that I have got the region ID that I need. Let's go ahead and close and apply this time. And now we see have a region ID, but the auto detection didn't happen. So I'm just going to drag drop and say that there is in fact a relationship between those 2 tables. Now that's important. If you don't have relationships, then what's going to happen is that the filtering behavior isn't going to work as you expect. So for anyone that is a database professional, they look at this diagram and they make an immediate assumption that is likely to be wrong. Does anyone know what that assumption is? What do relationships mean in an entity relationship diagram? It's one of the first things I do as a consultant, like, what's your database? Show me a diagram. Show me all the tables and the relationships. What those relationships tell me is that this is how referential integrity is being enforced. You cannot sell a product if it is not defined in the product table. So we define a foreign key in the sales table. Referential integrity is critical to operational database design. And it works in 2 different ways. It means that you cannot sell a product that you don't own, and you cannot delete a product that you've sold. So it protects the data on both sides of a relationship. To make the assumption that that's what the relationships mean here is completely false. The relationships describe how filters applied to one table will propagate across to other related tables. For example, if I filter by region New England, what we can see here is there's a one-to-many relationship between those tables. States belong to a region. Regions can have multiple states. What you need to note here is the direction of the filter propagation says filter a region, that will filter the states, and then it cascades down, the states will filter the sales. All right, that's what the relationships mean. All right, well, let's take a closer look at them. By double-clicking a relationship, it brings up the designer. It says, well, this column is related to this column. Great. The cardinality, is it one to many, many to one, one to one? This one here, I'm going to turn on. The Power BI solution won't assume there's referential integrity being enforced. There's nothing to say that you have to relate columns that are involved in foreign key relationships. But where you know that the back-end database is enforcing integrity, you should turn this on. The difference is when it queries it, is the difference between it using an inner join because it knows there's matches on both sides, as opposed to it using an outer join, which could leave you with blanks coming up in your report because it says, well, I don't know. All right, so I'm going to go into each of these relationships and say, go ahead and assume there's referential integrity. Do not set that if there is not referential integrity because you could end up with unexpected results. All right, the inner join might eliminate things that you don't expect. I've now arrived at the stage of having produced the foundation of a model via queries, the transformational logic, and then the relationships to bring those queries together. Now at this stage I could switch to the report view and I could start building out a report based on this, but it's not quite ready. There's modeling to be done to clean this up a little bit. All right, so first of all, I deal with the renaming of tables and columns. I could rename at this level, but I demonstrated I could also rename at the query level. So at this stage, I'm satisfied that this model is friendly enough. The next thing I'm concerned about is that columns like region ID, these are internal identifiers, and I don't want them to be visible to anybody here that might say, oh, let's analyze region ID. Did you know that the sum of region ID equals, let it catch up, some interesting number? Now, the temptation for people to just drag fields is great. We want people to explore and understand their data, but we don't want them to do it in an inappropriate way. All right, so by aggregating an identifier, like typically with a sum, you're going to end up with some very strange behavior. All right, so hold on. You're supposed to be a card. Start with a card, put the region ID in there. Okay, count of region ID, or worse, sum of region ID is completely nonsensical. The best way to deal with this is hide them. So here in the diagram view, I just go ahead and hide all of these ID columns. And I'm not sure if it shows up well on the television here, but you should see that they're grayed out. So there's a visual feedback that says in the model, as you'll now see, those IDs have disappeared. All right, so the next thing would be to perhaps explore our calendar. So the question came up, well, we want to bin. For time, I don't think that's appropriate, but what I do have in my sales table is a month and a year. By the way, personally, I'd prefer that there was a date table that was separate, but I just wanted to demo something. So in the real world, I'd have a separate table that controlled date. I can right-click the table here, and I can create a hierarchy. Not in report view. Hold on. No, I need to right-click the field that will become the first level of a hierarchy and say, create a new hierarchy based on this. I'll rename the hierarchy to become calendar, and then I'll drag month and drop it onto calendar, and what you can see now is I've got a hierarchy to support navigation within fields of a table. Okay, the next thing we'll have a look at is formatting. All right, so if I just drag quantity onto my report and I express this as a card, I can control that quantity as a field here on the modeling ribbon should be expressed as a whole number and as a 1,000 separator. By the way, if I came into the card and said do not apply auto, you'll see that's how the formatting is applied. So when it comes to the presentation of your data for numerics, you should expressly set how you would like that to be formatted. The next thing to look at is, what if I analyzed unit price? Let's bring unit price into the card. And we can see that the total unit price is 5,352,000. Is that making a lot of sense? What's it doing? What logic is it performing on a column when there are multiple rows of data? It's summing them, right. So what you'll see here is that there is a sigma symbol telling us that these numeric fields are summarizable or aggregatable. What it means then is you want to control this in certain situations. Here, the default summarization says it will sum. That is the most common aggregation. But for something like unit price, the default should be set to average. So that when we analyze it, and as we should see here, we would expect to see average unit price. I'm sorry, that's done it to the wrong one. Sum, select unit price, average. That's a bug. If I remove that and drag unit price out, make that a card, now we get the average. All right, so you want to adjust the default summarization for certain numeric columns that you know are not summarizable. All right, so min, max, average would be appropriate here. The next thing would be for state and the state code. We can categorize columns and give extra description to them. That this field is a state or a province, as is state code. All right, and of course what's going to happen is that when used in visuals, the user sees here that these are spatial fields. And so the default selection will be to use a map to show what the states look like. States, and go and show me the sum of quantity. All right, last topic for modeling is business logic. So we already saw that we could add columns in queries using M, but more common. Could you check the power for me, Nick?
Sure.
I'm plugged in down here, but is this actually powered in? Is that on?
Yeah, it looks to be on.
So is that powered in anywhere though? Because I'm not.
Yeah, full unit. You got any power now?
Yes, I have. So that must have been dead. All right. So where was I? Business logic. This is a really important topic for modeling, and this is where the language of DAX will come in. So I'll show you two examples of what we could do with DAX. Notice we have quantity and unit price, but we don't actually have the sales amount. So I could solve that by adding in a new column to that table, name it sales, and it's simply equal to quantity multiplied by unit price. And then you see here the addition in the model of a calculation named sales, and now I could say, well, here I'm interested in the sum of sales.
So if we wanted to get a weighted average unit price, you calc it out using sales.
An average
unit price, weighted average unit price. So
sure. Well, that would be a DAX expression. So you would have your divide this by this.
Take sales over total sales times unit price.
Correct. So, so when it comes to custom logic beyond simple aggregation of a single column, then that's where DAX would come in. The other type of calculation, and then we wrap up the modeling, is to define a measure. So the measure that I've got is in fact this one here. In DAX, I use a function that says divide the sum of sales by, and the calculate function is one of the most powerful functions in DAX that allows a context modification. What it's saying is calculate the sum of sales for all regions, whereas the numerator is saying just give me the sum of sales for whatever regions are being filtered by. So what this gives us is a % of grand total across the region. All right, so let me just paste this in. I won't make this a DAX lesson tonight, and we'll express this as a percentage, but what it now means is, where did that go? Oh, it's here. I just didn't give it a name, and its name is sales percent of all regions percentage. I can now drag this out as a card and see, well, what was the percentage across all regions? Well, of course, when we're not filtering on a region, but if I do pass in a page filter and I say, well, what happened in New England? Well, New England represents 8.24% across all sales. All right, so custom logic, as the question just came up, DAX is a reasonably powerful language to support this. I have now arrived at the point where I have a model. So what remains then is building some interactive experience, which we're going to embed into an application and allow live querying within the app. Let's just make sure that I save everything so nothing strange means I have to start everything again. US sales analysis. Everything that I'm doing here in Power BI Desktop is being saved to a single file with a PBIX extension.
Is it just a zip with stuff in it, or it's a bind?
Yeah, it's a zip. So the model itself is a JSON, is described in terms of JSON. So if anyone works with analysis services, there are hacks that allow you to take the model defined here and deploy it to analysis services. All right, so in answer to your question, yes, it's a group of files that work together for a single Power BI solution.
Your source control strategy, have you come up with this?
So the question is source control strategy, and there is no source control, apart from the Power BI desktop file itself being stored in a source control system.
Yeah. We sort of, well, so it's single user.
Yeah, if Adam was here, he'd have something more to say, and that is essentially there's no enterprise lifecycle management going on here.
Yeah.
All right. So from an application point of view, you will define your report in this file, and this could become something that you check into a source control system. As and when you need to make changes, it's at this entire file level.
Yeah. How does that prove problematic in your professional? Like, what we have trouble all the time with?
Yeah, it's been the reason why we're not ready for this. From an enterprise perspective, it's like we're not going to deploy on this.
Yeah, even at our scale, we really struggle with person X overrode person Y's chart. Where's this chart? I haven't checked it in. Do you check it in? Do you make a change? It's crazy hard.
So there's no source control integration is the answer today. Okay, that's the modeling story. So Power BI Desktop does two things principally: define a model and then build reports on top of that model. All right, so bottom left corner, you'll see page 1. So this is the very first page of the report, and I'm going to call this, I think, remind me, regional sales analysis. All right, page 1 of my report. Then I can come to the home. I like to go to view, in fact, and turn on snap objects to grid. This is a relatively recent capability here, and it's going to help you align things a little better. Then I'm going to introduce an image, so it shows that we can bring in images like the Tailspin Toys logo, put that in the top corner. I'm also going to put in text, regional sales analysis. Okay, so for laying out the model, I'm going to drag year to the canvas, and the default behavior is that if it's a text field, it gives me a table with a column. Now, I could add in other columns here, but I want this to become an interactive filter, and that's precisely what the slicer is designed to do. So on the report canvas itself, I switch this single column table to become a slicer, and then when I filter, everything on the page is going to be filtered by that selection. Of recent times, they're now giving us a drop-down equivalent here, and I might come to the styling here and say selection control, select all is off, so I don't know why all is actually there. But it forces a single selection of 1 year. Now also, as I lay these out, I'm going to go to the formatting properties, and I'm going to turn on format the background. You'll see why later. I also want to filter by product category. So let's bring in a slicer for category, and we'll format its background. And for selection controls, I'm going to allow multi-select for this one. So we could filter by 2 at the same time. Very convenient. You can Control-C, Control-V. So I know that I want a second slicer. For region. So I'll just position this down here and then switch across that region is how we'll filter. Why is it filtering by New England? Because I have a page level filter filtering by New England. There's got to be a good reason. Now, when I see blank, I'm a little suspicious. I don't intend to see that. That would suggest to me that referential integrity.
Cancel before printing.
Yeah. So there's what happens when you don't say there's referential integrity. It says, there could be a blank on the other side. Okay, there's my filter context. I would like to just show some metrics, like let's show quantity as a card. So there's our formatted quantity. Set the background on, copy paste, bring in another card, and for this one we'll use our sales % of region. So remember, if I filter by New England, it's 8.4. I also want the ability to select all. Give me all regions. Give me all categories. Just a couple more visualizations. Let's look at sales by month. And so there's a reason that I had my month calculation. I want them to look like this in the report. Or, because I went to the trouble of building a hierarchy, I could place the hierarchy on the axes. And then I could drill down to see the months. I don't know why, but the default is to sort them in descending sales. I would like to see them chronologically ascending, so I sort them. And then if I switch this across to the visual that also provides a line, go ahead and put the average unit price on the lines. And one more. So I'd like to see demographic sales as a bar. All right, let me turn on the background. Turn on the background, and then as a report level property, I'm going to set the page background to be a custom color, which is the same color as the blue of the logo, BF6. So I end up with this type of report. I'd like to theme it exactly how the application itself that's going to embed it looks. Now the reason to go to all that trouble is that with the filtering you can appreciate how the interaction works. Slices are obvious. Highlighting is less obvious, that by selecting a month here, it's cross-filtering the rest of the report. There's also the ability at page level, or even report level. Let me throw product in here as a report level filter, but just filter for these 3 products that we sell. All right, so there's a great topic. I could spend a whole hour talking about how you could filter and interact with the report. Any questions so far? We've covered a lot of territory with modeling and now reporting.
One question, and if it's not overly relevant, but it's just something that I'm trying to do, is that if you wanted to have one chart that, say for example, you wanted to show an option that would show sales by product or sales by region, and you wanted to provide a drop-down to show the different dimensions as to which you wanted. Are you able to do that with Power BI?
You would have to have, so for what you're asking, you'd have to have what I've done here, category and region, and you would just have to...
You can't have one?
No.
Yeah.
You can't union them together, so they can only be based, as you see here, the configuration is, it's based on one. For what you're after, you might achieve it through development effort with a custom visual. If there's some specific behavior you want.
It's just something I've been able to get to in other BI tools that Power BI hasn't seemed to.
Let's have a chat at the end of the session. I'll understand what you're asking for, and maybe there's another take on it.
Yeah, sure, please.
If you're not aware, there's a SQL Saturday event in Sydney. Is anybody going on Saturday? Okay, so Marco Russo is in town, and he's one of the leading experts on DAX and the engine here. And if you were to go to that event and ask him, he would have the absolute best answer. All right. He's presenting on Saturday, and I think he's in Sydney. It's at UTS. So if you go to sqlsaturday.com, you'll need to register. It's free, a full day of events, and lunch is thrown in. All right. So in fact, that's why I'm in town, to attend that.
That seals the deal.
Seals the deal. All right, and Marco, so he's got a whole session on time intelligence with DAX, so I would just get hold of him. Marco Russo.
Is he local or?
No, he's from Turin in Italy. So he's out here doing training, but all of the Microsoft Press DAX books, like the Level 400 internals, are written by Marco and his business partner, Alberto. All right, another question.
Yeah, just a quick one. On the date, so I play around with dates a lot as well. And there are a number of ways that we can select date. There are ranges, and we then select 2 dates. There's after that date, before this
Correct.
date.
So,
And I can't select just one date.
One date.
Unless it's in a drop down. I don't have the option.
So if you're using the range control, then you can't put the same date on both the from and to?
You can, but then you have to select it twice. It's sort of not a user-friendly.
It's not designed for a single date, a single point in time. It's designed for a range. So therefore, I would configure it to become one of these.
Yeah, exactly.
And then if you have multiple of them, so filter on year, and this slicer is quarter, and this one is month, and this one gives you date, then you can narrow down to reveal the date you want to filter by. Okay. I need multiple pages. I don't mean this demo to go too long, but to show you things in Power BI embedded. But the quick way of doing this is that I can duplicate this page. And so this one I'm going to call State Sales Analysis. And we'll just retitle it, and then I will just remove all of these. So this is just a good example of once you become proficient, just how quickly you can start to interact and lay out your data. Here, I just want to show state and sales. Let's look at this as a fill map. So exactly the same filter capabilities, and we have this. One more, because I do need it for the later demo. Duplicate page again. Let's look at demographic sales analysis. And it's worthy then to point out that we could go to the visual gallery and steal someone's custom visual. And it's pretty simple to download and install. So in fact, Marco Russo and his company is responsible for producing a number of these. OcViz is his company. The one that I like for demo, and I can never think of a great business application unless you're a fish and chip shop, is the Enlighten Aquarium. So let me just download the PBI viz file. So I'll remind you that earlier I said as a developer, if you have the skills and inclination, you can develop your own custom visuals, or as I'm doing here, you can steal other people's. Steal isn't the right word. You're welcome to download and then import the custom visual into your solution. So what needs to be said here is that Power BI Embedded has absolutely no problem with working with these. So let's bring in that we'd like to see demographic and sales. And so the size of the fish will represent proportionally where the sales are happening. Okay, so all going well. When this embeds, you're going to see a custom visual will just work. In preparation for importing to Power BI Embedded, I'm going to clean things up, like let me select all products in this report level filter. Let me reset all of the filter context and maybe switch it to 2016. All right, so that when people open up this report in the app, there is a default context already set. And then once I'm satisfied it's ready to go, I just save. and close, because an attempt to import it while it's still open will generate errors. But what I've just demonstrated to you there is how to produce this file that is 226 kilobytes, but with an understanding of how to connect to your database, how to transform it, model it, and then express it through an interactive report. That's creating the Power BI desktop report. Any questions?
When you import from the gallery, does that remain in Power BI? Like if you open it again and want to do a different project?
So what happens is it imports the entire definition, which means it's part of the Power BI desktop file. What's important there is that if the author of that visual released a new version of it, you are locked in at the version that you imported. All right, so everything that it needs is contained and stored in the Power BI desktop file. All right, so even if you upload it to the service, it will use that particular version of that visual. All right, so you're guaranteed it works as you expect it to from when you imported it.
Peter, what's the experience with they do quite a lot of releases on the Power BI. What's the experience with these custom visuals?
The experience formerly was poor. And then they learned their lessons, and that was they've fixed their framework and they've sandboxed things to ensure that several things, that what the custom visual doesn't interfere with what Power BI is doing, and also they manage the versioning. So they ensured that you could version a control, and also the developer can upgrade the version as and when they're ready. So they've addressed many of the concerns and the stability issues.
Is there a range of pricing for custom visuals, or is it just user-friendly?
Custom visuals, they're at no cost. They're the community gallery that Microsoft contribute to and others, but there's nothing to stop you developing your own. So the cost is, of course, development cost.
Right.
All right. So moving to the topic of tonight, we needed that background because many of you had not seen Power BI Desktop. We also had to talk about specifics. Direct query, 2 Azure databases are only supported, and now we come to the story that we want to embed this into our app. All right, so the core concepts are you have your data in one of the supported sources, and in our app we want an interactive analytic experience embedded. So the way that it works is this. The developer or an Azure Ops team in your organization will have a subscription, and they will provision a Power BI embedded resource. It is in fact technically what we call a workspace collection. So as a collection, it allows you to connect to sources, but ultimately define workspaces whereupon you can import Power BI desktop files into. When it imports a Power BI desktop file, it breaks it into 2 things. There is the data set, which is the model, and there is the report, which is the visualization that connects to the model. Then it's just a matter of some configurations and programmatically generating a token that provides authority to interact with that report within an app instance. All right, so in this demo, we'll provision a Power BI embedded resource, create a workspace, and then import the Power BI desktop file. So I'll switch across to my Azure portal. And here I've got a resource group named Sydney Net User Group. And I'm going to add into it the Power BI embedded resource. So just searching on the term Power BI. Fingers crossed.
You're tapping into the Wi-Fi at the top.
No, I just think it fell asleep. I'm a little surprised by that. What about if we just do an F5? Collectively cross our fingers and see what happens. I miss the days of years ago when you had no dependency on the cloud and your demos were guaranteed to work because who cared if the internet was on or not. Well, I got enough money too. Well, this would be a disaster if I can't get this far. Seriously. All right, Power BI embedded. There's not a lot you need to do to provision this. You need to come up with a unique or a globally unique workspace collection name. So I'm going to guess Sydney Net UG. is a unique name. There are a number of locations. I'm going to have a look now. Australia Southeast is supported. We'll keep it in the South Central US because that's where the Azure SQL database is. So it makes sense to keep things co-located. We'll talk about pricing later. So for now, it's just a matter of clicking create, and really within a matter of seconds, I've provisioned a workspace collection. It is identified by its globally unique name, and it's authenticated via an access key. So deployment is started. Literally, it takes seconds, usually. There we go. So let me return to the resource group. And here it is. I'll point out that there are 0 workspaces, as you would expect. So we'll have to create a workspace. You have to import desktop files into workspaces. I'm going to copy the workspace collection name for later reference into my settings file. So I know that that's my collection name. And then when it comes to authenticate with the service, I'll come to its access keys, and we'll copy key number 1 for later reference. Okay. When it comes to creating a workspace, there is no function in the portal to do this. So you need to do it programmatically. And Microsoft will assist you by providing you with a command line interface, which is pretty easy to install. It's called Power BI -CLI, command line interface. And it's just going to take a matter of seconds to download and install this. So it's a command line utility that allows us to do a number of things that I'll demonstrate to you now. The first will be to create a workspace. The second will be to import the Power BI desktop file. And the third will be we need to apply the connection details, so the username, password, and connection string, because they do not move with the file. This is why I said earlier that if you pass the Power BI desktop file to people and they opened it, the first thing they're going to be challenged for is, who are you? Authenticate. All right, because it will not store those details. Now that this is installed, let's perhaps play with the font size. What's a good size? 20, maybe? When you come to the help, you're going to see that there are a list of commands. It's very, very straightforward to work with. So what I'm demonstrating here is something that's set up. It's part of the setup for your app. We've gone to the portal, we've provisioned a workspace collection. The next steps are to create a workspace. To help us with this, there is a config command. And I'm going to pass into it, first of all, the workspace collection name. Because you need to refer to these time and time again, you can store them in as config values. And you'll see here that it says, okay, the collection name is SydneyNetUG. And then there's one for the access key. So rather than type them in time and time again, we just set them as config values. All right, so the next thing will be Power BI, create workspace. There we go. A workspace is identified uniquely by a GUID. There is no friendly name for it. It's just a container. And so I'll copy this to the clipboard, and then I'll go ahead and I'll set it as a config value. So you now see I have 3 things stored. What that means is that when I execute certain commands, if they require a collection, access key, or workspace, they will use the values that I have here. Now, returning to the portal, if I come back to my overview, we see evidence that that workspace has been created. There it is. Next thing we need to do is import a file. So I'm going to save some time here by copying this command here. There is the file path to the US sales analysis, the Power BI desktop file. So the import command takes an option of where is the file and the friendly name. And now it's importing the Power BI desktop file into the workspace. The last step will be, as we just learned, is the credentials are not understood. So we need to apply them. And that's achieved through the Power BI update connection command. So rather than type it out, to save some time, I'm first of all going to enumerate all data sets in the workspace, because the way that you update a connection string is you need the unique identifier of the data set. So this tells me that the data set with the name US Sales Analysis is identified with this GUID. And I made mention before that there's also a report ID. That one file gets split into two types of objects. So let's look up the report identifier as well. We will need that later. Okay, with the dataset ID, I then pass it into the command here. Update the connection for the dataset with this ID. The connection string is this path here, and the username and password are here. Okay, that's not looking good. Must be of type object, parameter value element. Is there something obvious I've done wrong? Let's run that again. I'm expecting no red messages. Parameter value element must be of type object.
Run. Add the brackets this time.
Nope, that's correct there. So unless I've got the GUID wrong, I've absolutely copied the full path. Okay, I'm not feeling too good about this, but we'll just have to soldier on. That completes the demo. I have provisioned the embedded resource. I've created a workspace. I've imported the report, which involved updating its connection string. The developer story then. So there are various APIs that you'll work with. The Power BI API is available for you to directly work with. The command line interface encapsulates common functionality. So I'll come to your question in just a moment. I've just demonstrated provisioning datasets, reports, setting connection strings, enumerating datasets and reports. You can do this in your own .NET code. Of course, when it comes to embedding reports, you could do this also, and that's where the application is going to seamlessly, authenticate, grab a token, use that to then embed a report into your application. So everything that I've just demoed, you may do manually in your own project. It looks tedious, and yes, you need to do it, but the automation side is really about the embedding. And of course, a user won't be doing lots of things with a command line interface at that stage. Sorry, you had a question?
Just, I guess, following on from the problem you had before, do you regard it as fairly fragile, or you found it stable and this is quite
I found it reasonably stable. So the problem there could be the command line interface may have been updated since I last used it. All right, so I've done this demo enough times, and I built labs from Microsoft on this, so that I know that that shouldn't happen. In fact, I know there should be 3 green responses. So I'm a little wary of what's going to happen, but we'll just see what does. I may have a backup solution to work with. There are APIs for automation. So with Azure, pretty much anything can be scripted. So whether it's the provisioning of the entire service, you could set that up. And then there's a JavaScript API, which is a client-side API allowing seamless interaction and bidirectional communication with the report, which is where we'll head in the next topic. From an app point of view, it is your application that is responsible for the user authentication. Your app will already be doing this, no doubt. So you continue to manage your users and their permissions. And your app will then issue tokens that authorize access to reports. And it is the token that determines what can be accessed for how long and what permissions for data they will have. Okay, so we need to stress this. It's very different to the Power BI service. You've signed in and you have access to resources. Your app is now responsible for the authentication. and it's likely to have its own identity store of users and roles. Essentially, without going into a lot of code tonight, here we see an example of how to create a report embed token. And essentially what it wants is the name of the workspace collection, the GUID for the workspace, the GUID for the report, and of course it will need the access key for the service itself. If you have all of the combinations correct, you're going to get a token, which then will accompany every request to embed the report.
Not to seem dumb, but let's say you're using OpenID authentication. So in theory, your application would handle that, so it would have already authenticated in some fashion.
Authenticated with what?
In our case, we're using B2C,
so it really isn't, it's sort of irrelevant to this service. At the end of the day, your app...
Your web service acquires the token on behalf...
Well, your app will continue. Let's just imagine you already have an app where it requires authentication. Nothing needs to change. Yep. What that means is that within an instance of the app, you know who the user is.
Yep.
That's all that matters.
Yep.
All right?
Once you've done that, you just then use your superior credentials to acquire that token.
See, your app will have the access key to the Power BI embedded service workspace collection. So you are responsible as an app developer to say, and watch how the story evolves, is that you're responsible to say, this is Fred. Fred works in the Midwest region. And then you're going to request a token for Fred, and you'll see how it comes together. Gotcha. Okay, so we stress that. You as the application developer are responsible for how you manage authentication and authorization. Is there another question in the back? No? Okay, so we're not going to dwell on the code, but essentially these are the parts that we need in order to embed a report. Where the demo goes now is that there's a great sample application that Microsoft have made available called the Report Embed Sample. So I'm not actually going to develop an app, but I'm going to show you how the code works. There are two ways this app works. The first is you could just embed a sample report, which is what I'll do if I can't get my report working. Or if we pass in the GUID for our report and we generate a token as our application would do, and we pass it in here, this sample app will embed our report. And that demonstrates it doesn't matter how this app is working. If it has those pieces of information, then it's able to embed the report. All right, so we know that the report ID is this. That is the unique identifier for the report in our workspace. For the embed token, we have a command called create embed token. When we request the help on it, there are different variations, but essentially it wants to know your collection, the workspace, the report ID, and the access key for the service. And optionally, a username and the roles that the user belongs to. I'm not going to follow that path immediately. I'm going to say that the report ID is this. The config values know what the access key, workspace, and collection are. So there is a token that would give anything. Doesn't matter. Anybody that has that token can now embed this report. Let's just get another one and output it to a text file. So it's going to be easy to copy. There is the embed token that your application will programmatically retrieve. So here's the test. I'm not sure what happened when we updated our connection string, but when I click next, notice up here we've moved from the authorized to the embed stage. It's quite a clever application that shows you the three phases. Here are the values that I just passed in, and then here is the code, and this is client-side JavaScript code for doing the embedding into the iframe or the div down here. All right, so the lines of code here are just getting the values from these inputs, and this is the logic required to embed the report into the div down here. So to run it, we just click up here and it runs the code. Fingers crossed. Yeah, so it did work. So that error message was false. I'll report that back. I know that it's worked. If it couldn't connect, we'd get lots of X's on each of the visuals saying, can't retrieve the data. But the real test here is that I can filter by, northwest, and there is a live query hitting the Azure SQL database. So here is the experience working, page navigation working as well, even the custom visuals. The JavaScript API. So now that we've embedded the report, there's some amazing things that you can achieve with this client-side script. Provides bidirectional communication between the report and your app, enables easier integration, and enables programmatic interaction. So we can embed a specific report. That was what the first code had just done. We can enable or disable page navigation or filters. We can load a default page if you know programmatically what that would be. You can programmatically navigate between pages, enable, disable the filter pane, apply filters at page or report level, react to events that the user might click on a fish. We want to know what did they click on so that our application can do something in response to that. And then we can also enter full screen or exit full screen mode for the report. All right, so here's an example of what we might do. I click on a fish and a JSON document can be thrown back and you can catch it. And then you can determine what they clicked on and what values they saw and then decide to do something within the app itself. So the best way to explore this is in this sample app is to move to the interact page. All right, so now that we've embedded our app, or report, excuse me, it's not terribly clear, but this drop-down list in the top left allows us to look at the different scopes. Are we doing a report level operation, a specific page level operation, or an event listener? For the report operation, here we see the code required to get the ID of the report. There's the GUID for it. That's not really so interesting. Let's clear that. What are the pages that this report has? So when it comes to learning, how do I write the code client-side to enumerate the pages of the currently loaded report? Well, there it is. And it tells us that there are 3 reports that have these names. So you could generate a drop-down list, and you could hide the page navigation. So do we have that one? And then the user wouldn't see these. It would be your app controlling how you navigate between pages. To set the page, there we go. Let's set the page to report section 2. Run this. I think I'm already on 2. Let's go to page 1, run this. There we go. It's navigated to page 2. Setting filters. This example won't work because we don't have a store table, and I can't change the code here. But if you use the embedded sample report, it would work. What are the filters that are in context? And it tells me that there is a product filter, but nothing is being filtered. So I could come in here and say, well, let's filter this report by just the top 3 products. So you'll notice that the report's updated. We could run this again and it tells me. So programmatically you can determine the filter context being applied at report level or possibly page level. What if we remove filters? Bang, programmatically you can remove them. We could print, and that'll bring up the browser's print experience.
How well does it print?
That's up to your browser.
Okay, it's just a screen dump.
Correct. So, Chrome, Safari, Firefox, they have different experiences, but they take an image and they...
PDF dumping or anything like that?
Not that I'm aware, so that's my understanding. It's just a image capture. Updating settings, so note that we have a filters pane on the right, page navigation down here, yet the code is going to say filter pane enabled false, but page navigation is true. There we go, it's off. Reload's important. I want to reload the report completely, which guarantees any cached data is being discarded and we have the absolute latest data coming from the database. Enter full screen mode can be achieved programmatically as well.
Just about reload.
Yeah.
When you normally do it and you're sitting on Power BI, you get those spinning circles for an entertainingly long amount of time, like you consider your own mortification. This seems much quicker.
Because I've got very low volumes of data.
Okay.
And I've given this database high DTU, which giving it high performance, which at the end of this demo I'll be turning off because it's expensive. All right, so the topic is knowing that live queries are hitting your database is that you need to ensure it has sufficient performance. And that if you have very complex logic or large volumes of data, you need to think from a database perspective how I'll optimize for this. So column store indexes and indexed views, all those types of topics come to the fore to guarantee that you get a responsive experience here. So network latency is one thing, but the optimization of your database is another. Okay. All right, so we will switch to page level, and basically very, very similar things to do. Bring a page into focus or manage the filters at page level. And then lastly, let's look at some event listeners. So we want to know when a page has changed. So you can see here, it's just writing back to the log to say, hey, someone's changed the page. And then for data selected, what happens when I click on a fish? You clicked on the fish, which is professional. Great, so the app's going to go ahead and give something. I don't know. It's up to the creativity of the app developer. That's the JavaScript API, and what is great about that sample app is that the source code's available for it as well, but obviously you copy that code and it's really just a minor update to fit the requirements of your app.
One of the things that's quite handy in Power BI is throwing to a table supporting data that makes up all filtered views. So if you click on a number of interactive graphs and you've gone and found an anomaly with data and you see the underlying rows of data in your source. Is that something you can do by JavaScript API and throw that back?
So sure, because what you've seen is that you can understand the context of what was clicked on, and then you've got the ability programmatically to apply a filter perhaps to another report. So if you've got an app that has multiple windows open, you could click here and pass filter context over here.
So you basically derive a filter to your own query to throw back into a table on your other.
Well, you're throwing it back against another report to be applied against it.
Yeah, your question is slightly different. I think what he's trying to do is pull the data out that is actually the physical data.
So not the context, you want the actual rows of data?
Well, identification of rows. So one thing that's really good is showing you the data. One thing that's not very good at is giving you the ability to manipulate sort, group, and perform basic functions on that data. It's just a static table.
Yeah, so you're confined to the report definition itself. There's no editing of a report to say, I need to create a new experience based on this. So the developer has to think ahead of time to say, what are all the possible visualizations that will answer the questions that people will have. Now, a more advanced scenario could be, there's nothing to stop your app supporting the uploading of Power BI desktop files from the analysts themselves. You could automate that whole process. So you could have a group of users that want to be able to publish their own reports into the app.
It's probably the other way. It's more, we can talk about it later.
Let's take that one offline. But there won't be the ability to customize the report definition in the embedded experience.
Okay.
Is there a REST API? REST API?
To achieve what?
Embed reports in iOS apps, for example?
So the API is a REST API. Okay, so all of to get a token, to import a Power BI desktop file, it's all part of the Power BI REST API.
So can you embed reports into iOS apps?
Yes, you can. So you're not limited to .NET applications. So anything that could work with the REST API, providing that using supported web browsers, then this could be achieved.
I mean, you would just use the embed.
Let me show you on the sample app. So where I would point you to is this. You could use that tool that I demonstrated. There is a .NET library, or there is Node.js code. So they are the package solutions for you to work with. I guess you could work direct with the REST API. All right, there's one more area I would like to show. I know pizzas have arrived, but it's really the security story. So I'm not sure whether you'd want to have a break and then we have pizza. They'll stay warm.
That's okay, they're right. They're all sort of wrapped together.
So the way that Microsoft envisaged this is that this works very well for ISVs and multi-tenant applications. So you've got one database, but you've got all customer data in there, and you need to isolate that a customer only ever sees their own data, and it's critical, and there has to be a guaranteed story Filtering is not the guaranteed story. Filtering is an interactive experience that you can work with as a user or programmatically with the JavaScript API. Do not ever use filtering as a substitute for secure limiting of access to data. That is achieved through the definition of roles in the model itself, so that when user 1 connects to the same report within the same app, they will see New Zealand data, but user 2, they're going to come in as an Australian user and they'll only ever see Australian data. Let's take a look then at how this is achieved, and it does require us to go back to the Power BI desktop file. It requires us to define roles, and roles define rules on how filtering of rows of tables take place. So what I'm going to do here is actually return to the editor, because it's a little complex at this company that sales managers can only see data from their sales region, but regions can have multiple managers and managers can have multiple regions. So we have this sort of twist here that we've got a complex scenario. And so I'm going to go back to the query editor and I'm going to create a new query. And you may have noticed that there was this other table that I hadn't selected, which is the manager region. And what it gives us then is the manager and the region they belong to. So let me just bring this in and we'll take a closer look at the data. First of all, I'm not so interested in these columns. I'll just rename these to become friendly. And we can notice here, for example, that Emily Hart comes from Southern, but Peng Wu, she belongs to 3, Midwest, Northeast, and New England. So we'll use those as the test cases and see what happens when we embed on behalf of these users. So applying this, that introduces a new table into the model, and there is a one-to-many relationship. All right, so regions can have multiple managers. Now, when working with direct query, this is in fact a preview feature. I need to come into options and I need to enable the preview feature, that is to enable cross-filtering in both directions for direct query. So the way that it works is that Microsoft introduced new features in preview, and once they've stabilized, they then release them as full supported capabilities. When I enable that, what that's going to allow me to do is come in here and make this a both, which is important. For a many-to-many relationship, it must be able to push filters in both directions. And that's all that's required, but we have this additional setting that says for security, filter in both directions either. And I don't know why I need to do this. And I've asked the engineering group and they've referred it to another specialist because they don't quite know either. So Marco Russo, I will be asking him on Saturday, he will know. But for now, being a very new feature, that's what I need to do to guarantee that this will work. The other thing I'm going to do is hide this. I don't want people to build reports on this. This is driving the security model. Now I'm ready, under modeling, to create a role. And there's just the one role that I want, which is going to be named managers. And I'm going to enforce a filter on the manager column. So anybody that connects via this role, we're going to force a filter that says whatever the manager's name is should be used here. Filter the table down by Peng Wu. There are 3 rows. And then allow only via the relationships that sales can be seen for her regions. There's a DAX function called username. Now, in the Power BI service and on the desktop, it will always return the authenticated user. On the desktop, it's domain/account. In the service, it'll be the email address. And what that means is if you're doing a text filter, you're going to have in your data the exact text match. Now, it's different in the Power BI embedded service because the developer can pass any text value they want. It doesn't have to be a username. It could be absolutely anything. All right, and I'll show you how that gets passed in. And therefore, whatever is passed in by the developer would be applied as a rule here, filtering down whatever column you want.
So effectively, it gets dumped into the Java token that's then passed, or it's constructed as part of the JWT, is it?
Correct, right. So it understands that this...
It becomes a, what's the word for it, a claim.
that this is the username and this is the collection of roles that they belong to. All right, so the app developer is totally responsible for assignment of what is the username and what are the roles that they belong to. So that's as simple as it is. This is a dynamic rule because there's a dynamic value passed in here for each token or embed request. Just out of demo, I could create another role called admin and apply no filters. So it could be that an admin within the app could be told that they assigned the admin role and they will see everything. But if the developer says that they belong to the manager's role and the name is Peng Wu, that's how it works. Now the great story is we can also view as roles here. So let's look at our report and test this. What if I did connect as a manager and my name was Emily Hart? Well, we would just see Southern. What if I connected as Peng Wu? So this should inspire you with confidence that I've configured relationships properly and the data values are as I would expect. What if I belong just to the, oh, this is worth checking out, hello world. What if I passed in a user that doesn't exist? They won't see anything, no sales, so that's a good test. And then lastly, what if we're an admin user and it doesn't even matter what the username is? You have full rights to all of the data. So now it's all configured. Let's save this as US sales analysis secured. Close. Switch back here and we'll import that as a second file. And now that's been imported, we need to look up its dataset ID and report ID. I'll just paste it into there and then I'll update its connection string. There's that error again. And then I need to get reports. It's this one here. Let's just put it there. So now switching back to the sample app, let's throw in the new secured report ID, and now I need to generate an embed token for Peng Wu. For that report, what is a username? And that is where whatever string value the developer wants will be passed in as the username option. And then for roles, she belongs to managers. Output that to token2.text.
You got a space next to the -u, does that matter?
Probably. Thanks for pointing that out. All right, let's open up and retrieve that token. Let's see what happens when we embed with this token. So Peng belongs to 3 regions only. Works. All right, that's securing report data. There's really more to it. You need to understand the modeling, relationships, DAX, all of that topic comes to the fore. So while I've demoed it to you, having a sound understanding of how all that works will pay in your favor. Where I want to wrap up is just to clarify where this fits in. I opened by saying that Power BI is a cloud-based service, and yes it is. That's as most people understand it. How does that fit with the topic tonight? So I like this flow that says, well, when it comes to choosing the right service, that if your app is exclusively used by internal employees, you probably should just stick with the Power BI service. You could publish that Power BI desktop file to your workspace and you could share it through different techniques. There's dashboard sharing, there's groups for collaboration, there's content packs. All right, that would require that the users within your org have the Power BI Pro license, which is $10 per user per month. For direct connect and direct query to work, they will need to be a pro user, and you can configure roles and you can map users to those roles. If there is a layer of authentication that happens at your app level, and it's not dependent on your Active Directory and your users and groups, well, this is where Power BI Embedded is designed to fit. Your app is then responsible for authenticating with the service, and then according to your own identity management, you will then pass in who your username is and what roles they belong to. And then you may embed. There is another story that Power BI does support embedding of publish to web. Is anyone familiar with this feature? Let me just finish off with a quick demo of it. When I asked you to complete an eval, I'm not sure if anyone noticed this, please leave this web session open. It doesn't matter if you didn't, but this report here, this is a Power BI service report, but as you now appreciate, it's exactly the same design as what you can achieve and publish or import into Power BI Embedded. I have the ability to publish this report to web. And it generates an embed code, and it gives me some HTML here that I can then come into my thank you page and replace this. So here's another story of how you can embed reports, but what's interesting to note is that there is no authentication here. Anybody that loads this web page is going to see, and it will support live interaction with the data that you guys had submitted. So let's wait for it to publish, and then if you've kept that page open, you can reload it and you have a complete interactive experience on your phone. So Microsoft are offering 3 different approaches to embedding. Where was I? Here, come back to the survey, reload. Is anybody getting that?
Yep.
Why am I not getting it? Hello? How come I'm not getting it? So people are getting it?
Yep.
What is going on here? It'd be nice to do a recording that I could show you what it looks like.
Copy the recursive from the browser.
Yeah, I did, and I opened up an in private view, so I don't know why it's been published.
I got it too.
Everybody else is getting it except me.
Do you want to hold the phone onto the camera so we can prove?
Why would it be caching this? That's never done that before. I'm reloading the page. Let's go back. Let me just submit a whole new survey result. Just to keep things different, I am an 18-year-old female living in Redfern, and I am an IT manager, and this is my first user group. Melbourne still has the best coffee. Now it gives me the report. Okay. Here's embedding as well. All right, so Microsoft providing 3. This is completely unauthenticated. Fantastic if you guys are blogging. The great news is that you can do this on the free license. Microsoft do not restrict this, and they will guarantee that anybody that gets to this page may interact with the data live within the page. Difference is when you're using the Power BI embedded, it's going to cost you. All right. It charges pay-as-you-go consumption. based pricing model. So the first 100 sessions per month are free, so I haven't paid anything for what I've done tonight. And then beyond 100 sessions, each session will be 5 cents. A session is defined in terms of when a user embeds, or when you embed a report and they interact with it, that is a session, and it will last for 60 minutes. If you move beyond 60 minutes, that will trigger as another session.
Is it the token acquisition that starts that? Like, what is the 60-minute start?
I would say it's the token acquisition. I don't have the exact answer for that.
So after 60 minutes, presumably it'll do a refresh token, and part of that process it will click the taximeter again.
Correct. And then as a managing the resource in, sorry, I've got too many windows open now. Where is my...
Does it automatically refresh the token? Like, is it dealing with refreshes in the background?
To be honest, I don't know the answer to that. I haven't noticed that I've come back later and it's said, oh, you need to reload, that it's just continued working.
Presumably doing its refresh itself in the background.
I am going to say I'm not 100% sure on that one. So is it automatically refreshing? I've never got that far to notice. And if I could just find the page where I have my Azure portal, which is here, when I reload this, what you're going to monitor is, well, how much is this costing me? So on the overview page of the workspace collection resource, you've got a tile down here that tells you right here the number of sessions.
So you can basically do some testing to see what happens in certain sessions and look at the outcome.
Well, I guess you could. Well, programmatically, what would happen if it wasn't going to refresh, you will get an error saying you have to reload the page. If after 60 minutes you're still interacting with the report, then it will tell you that, okay, it's automatically refreshing. So I don't have an answer for you, but you'd find out.
Presumably what happens is you've got the report open, you come back to it after 60 minutes, the web service, you would have known that it would have had to have acquired another token because you would have seen that through your web service actively acquiring the token.
It doesn't require any server-side code to have run. Remember, everything now, the JavaScript API is all happening client-side.
Yeah.
So
when you first acquired your token, your web service acquired the token for you as part of that process. If you're not doing that operation again, then in theory it must be quietly refreshing on its own, and it would seem most likely that it is dealing with that.
It is most likely. Now, there's also the ability for you to control duration. So you might say when you create the token that you want it to be for this amount of minutes. Okay, I haven't played with that. That suggests if you said that I want it to be 120 minutes, that the Azure service is keeping track. That's actually 2 sessions though. You're being charged for 2 sessions. All right.
How many refreshes it probably allows, which has a lifespan on the refresh, presumably.
They're all great questions. I don't absolutely know the answer for that, so I haven't played that depth with it. But I've not...
Nobody does. They just build answers.
I know, but some engineer at Microsoft will have the answer, but I've never stumbled across it yet through my own experience that, hey, damn, I need to reload the page to get that working again.
Just for clarity, that's 5 US cents.
It's 5 US cents, correct, so it's probably 6.2 Australian cents.
They do. They show you Aussie pricing if you go to the Aussie server.
I'm in discussion with a school. There's a great example is the school parents have lots of inquiries. You know, what's my kid's grades, results, absenteeism, whatever. It's perfect. The only problem we've got is the data's not in Azure. so otherwise it's a perfect fit. But there's a great example where, you know, the database knows parents' relationships to children. They can sign in, they can filter by an individual child of theirs, and they can see all sorts of statistics. For 5 cents, that's cheaper than having a phone call and someone have to answer that by looking up an internal database. So I think at 5 cents a session, there's a huge amount of application. And I think the message today is to let people know what this service can do. And if you have got data in Azure, then it's a no-brainer. If you've got an existing application, it's not a big deal to start integrating at relatively low cost these types of experiences. I do make this deck available for download, so I'm sure where this video is found, there'll be a link to download this in PDF. There are lots of resources out there. I mean, any search engine will find them by looking in Power BI. But what you're going to find is great interactive scenarios. This second link here is the one that I demoed from. The JavaScript API is fully documented. Microsoft have got a growing number of case studies that you can refer back to. So let's wrap up with any questions, and then we can wrap up with some pizza.
what if your data is not in Microsoft Azure?
So what if your data is not in Azure? There's two things. Get it in Azure. Now that could be as simple as saying, we know that we need certain data to support the analytic reports. Let's just do an ETL process once a day and push it up there. Now, depending on the usage, you may not pay a lot for that Azure SQL database. So it might be on a very low number of DTU. All right, so that's one approach. Or wait. So Microsoft are suggesting that, yeah, there's more to come. There's no announcements yet, but the #1 request I'm seeing from customers is we want our data to stay where it is. So that implies, as the service supports today, that a gateway would be there. So I'm not saying this is an announcement, but that's what customers are asking for.
Because there are limitations with enterprises and on security.
Absolutely. So data should not move, should remain in place. But you'd have to understand that it's the service still querying it. So it's not remaining on-prem in that situation, but the data is at rest on-prem. Okay, any other questions?
So I guess once printing sorted out, that would be the death knell for reporting services?
Would this be the death for reporting services? No, absolutely not.
Really? What would be the compelling feature for reporting services?
Well, first of all, reporting services is not restricted to a specific set of direct query only sources. And reporting services is really two engines now, paginated reporting and mobile reporting. If anything, there's an overlap between the mobile and the interactive with what Power BI offers. But absolutely not. You know, reporting services as an on-prem report server plays, you know, a very broad role anyway, and it may overlap part of what it does, but certainly not everything that it does.
Would you see more convergence in the engines and query languages and stuff like that?
What I can tell you is that Microsoft are acknowledging that there's too many tools, even with their own Microsoft products. So they've narrowed down to 4. So they'll continue to support interactive reports, which is Power BI. That's where they're putting all their investments. So new visuals, new capabilities will come here. Workbook reports with Excel, because a lot of people still use it. So Excel services, Excel Online. And then you've got the 2 reporting services approaches with paginated for, you know, detailed page print ready reporting, and then the mobile delivery that came from DataZen that interestingly enough is surfaced through the Power BI app. What you want to watch is that reporting services is becoming the single place for reporting. Its new web portal is already supporting in technical preview Power BI desktop reports. So I could take that Power BI desktop report and I could publish it on-prem to reporting services, and then we could interact with it through the portal without any requirement to go via the service or outside of the org. So watch what happens in that space. Reporting services is not going away. If anything, it's becoming the center of a hub.
Excellent. Great stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you for your time, attendance, and interest. And so we'll make this available for download. And thanks for joining us. Yeah.
Right, video ready.
Pizza is served. For those on video, apologies, it smells delicious. Thank you.